smaller supply, the demand is a little bit greater. Now, how did the Gaza Strip come to be? I'd like to start off with this picture of Gaza City in 1946, to a great extent because it looks so different than our perceptions of what the Gaza Strip looks like now. Gaza City was a prosperous town prior to 1948. It had functioned as a collecting and forwarding center for the trade, primarily in agricultural goods, from all around the Gaza area, which was an area rich, notwithstanding the narrative, it was a desert, rich in citrus, in wheat, and in barley crops. And so the roughly 80,000 residents of Gaza City in 1946 were deeply rooted in the hinterland surrounding what would subsequently become the Gaza Strip. And this is one of the things that it's important to bear in mind when we recall the history that Vesma recounted earlier. There are reasons why partition was the plan that was advocated by the Zionist forces, or by Zionists in 1947, and why many in the international community supported it, and why many in the international community continue to support partition as a solution to Palestine and Israel. And we can talk about the merits and liabilities of that, particularly vis-a-vis the present day, in the discussion that will follow. But the thing that I want you to bear in mind is the violence that borders do to people. When you create borders around a particular space, what you're doing is hemming people in, and also keeping them from reaching the areas that were historically important to them. And so it's incredibly important to bear in mind that one of the things that happens in 1948 and 1949 is not just that we see a flow of some 200,000 Palestinians, primarily from central and southern Palestine, into the area that at this juncture is controlled by the Egyptian army and is therefore, from their perspective, safe. More than tripling the size of the Gaza Strip's, or the Gaza area's population. And you can imagine what the consequences are. We've seen what refugee flows are doing to economies these days in the context of the Syrian war, the situation in Myanmar, vis-a-vis the Rohingya, etc. But it's not only the case that the inflow of refugees placed a strain on the economy and the internal politics of the Gaza area. It's also the case, of course, that people in the Gaza, what became the Gaza Strip, were prevented themselves from accessing what had been their primary means of employment, accessing the lands that had been a source of agricultural goods for trade. And you get just a little bit of a sense from the map up here on the screen. If you look at all of those little purple dots within the territory that is now the State of Israel, those are villages that were depopulated between 1948 and 1949. Some in circumstances where the villagers fled ahead of advancing Zionist militias, some in which they were ordered to leave. What's important to bear in mind, of course, is that they were never allowed, and have never been allowed, to return to the places from which they fled. So this is the origin of the Gaza Strip. And there's much that can be told about the history of the Gaza Strip from 1949 until the present. I want to just highlight a couple of things before I turn to the next question, which is the current restrictions on it. The next really important moment in time that I want you to bear in mind is, of course, 1967. As David pointed out, it was in 1967 that Israel invaded and ultimately occupied the Gaza Strip along with the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. And the Gaza Strip remained under full Israeli control and occupation until 2006. And in 2005, and in 2005, Israel undertook a redeployment of its military out of the Gaza Strip, and also repatriated the roughly 6,000 Israeli settlers who had been residing in Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip since the 1970s. I will come in a few moments to the question of whether, notwithstanding the withdrawal of Israel Armed Forces, from the Gaza Strip, the Gaza Strip remains occupied. But I want you to bear in mind just that basic timeline. So what's the situation in the Gaza Strip today? You can see here a map produced by the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And there are a few things about this map that I want to call your attention to. Number one, if you look at the areas in orange, those are, the areas in, I have to get a little closer to yes, in orange. So if you look at the areas in orange, those are the urban areas in the Gaza Strip at present. And so what had been an agricultural community has become one of the most urban areas in the Middle East. But it's not just, of course, that it's densely populated and urban. It's also that the people of the Gaza Strip are very heavily restricted in terms of their capacity to move. You can see up here on this screen, and I regret I don't have the time to go into this in a lot of detail. You can see up here on this screen the points at which Gazans had previously been permitted to enter and leave the Strip during the period roughly from the early 90s until 2005, 2006. Some of these are terminals just for goods. Some of them are terminals that were primarily used for people. But what you have to bear in mind is that at this juncture, almost all of them are closed to the vast majority of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza International Airport was destroyed by Israel during the Second Intifada in 2001-2002. The Erez crossing, which had been the site through which hundreds of thousands of Gazans exited to enter Israel for work, and also to get to the West Bank, has been, to a very substantial extent, closed to Palestinian movement since this time. And the only crossing that has been open intermittently, though it's only recently been reopened after years of being largely closed to Palestinian movement, is the Rafah crossing with Egypt. And so this 1.8 million population is barred from entering or leaving the Strip. And beyond that, it is also foreclosed from receiving a very significant array of goods. Now, at the onset of the blockade that Israel imposed in 2006 as a punishment for the Palestinians in what were, at that juncture, the first episode of free and fair elections to occur in the Arab world over probably the previous 5 decades. As a punishment for Palestinians electing Hamas, Israel imposed a blockade on these territories, which was deepened after Hamas in following what might properly be characterized as a civil war between Hamas and Fatah in 2007. Hamas took control over the Gaza Strip. And since that time, not only has Palestinian movement of people been sharply limited, but goods ranging from chocolate to construction materials have been restricted in terms of access to the Gaza Strip. I realize that time flies. Let me say a few words with respect to the last point, and then I look forward to further discussion after people have had a little bit of coffee. Is the Gaza Strip still occupied by Israel, notwithstanding the fact that Israel withdrew its military and its settlements from within the Gaza Strip? This is an issue about which there is some controversy. The law of occupation is a little bit vague with respect to what constitutes occupation. It refers to effective control over territory. Now, many will argue that this should be understood as black or white. And you see some, particularly within the human rights community, Human Rights Watch is one example, saying clearly white Israel continues to occupy the Gaza Strip. Why? Because of the extent of its control over the envelope, Gaza's borders, over the maritime areas off Gaza's coast, the ability of Gazans to get their foodstuffs, to get medical supplies, and more broadly, their ability to move. And on top of that, thank you, on top of that, the fact that Israel has maintained within the Gaza Strip, and you can see this in this map here, a 500 meter to 1.5 kilometer no-go zone all around the edge of the Gaza Strip, restricting Palestinian access to that area using live fire. In view of all of those factors, Human Rights Watch says, listen, there is still an occupation in place. Israel has full responsibility. Others, particularly the Israeli government, say, no, we are no longer effectively controlling the Gaza Strip. Hamas is effectively in control of the Gaza Strip. We bear no more responsibility for this territory than the Egyptians do, who also run or have an effect and influence on whether the border crossing in Rafah is run. As I close, I just want to urge a third approach, which I think makes the most sense, which is one that's been urged by Professor Eyal Gross of Tel Aviv University and embraced by Israeli human rights organization called Gisha, the Center for Freedom of Movement, which urges a functional approach to dealing with this, and saying it's not black or white. The extent to which Israel remains in occupation of the Gaza Strip turns upon the extent to which it is preventing Palestinians from doing certain things in certain ways. And what we should do is look at this question function by function, hold Israel responsible for those functions that it continues to constrain, and hold others responsible for others. Now, very last point, and I know that I'm already over time. Why does all of this matter? I just want to say one thing here. It doesn't matter only because the lives of 1.8 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are affected. It also matters because, as Darrell Lee at the University of Chicago has written, the Gaza Strip has historically been a laboratory in which Israel has tried policies that it has subsequently applied elsewhere. Precisely the measures that have been imposed on the Gaza Strip over these last decades have been gradually imposed within the West Bank, for example, in the Seam Zone, on the border between the West Bank and Israel proper. And so Gaza, to my mind, offers not only, or reflects not only a terrifying present, but also a terrifying and very worrying vision of the future of the West Bank if current trends continue as they've gone so far. Apologies for going too long.
Thank you, Omar. So, brief comments from other panelists, and let's keep it very brief because we're over time.
Great. Quick question. With the reconciliation agreement between Fatah and Hamas, very currently with the mediation and encouragement and pushes from Egypt, which so far Israel seems to be sort of going along with. Obviously, we can't predict is the Rafah crossing in fact going to be open or not in a serious way. But I guess maybe more than that, my question is: do you think that the parties, including Hamas, Fatah, and Egypt, want it to be open enough that there's a reasonable possibility that there will be a whole major change in the situation now?
It's a great question. I think that there's no question but that Hamas wants it to be open. And I think the conversation about Palestinian reconciliation is a longer one, but I think that for Hamas, particularly after the electricity supply to the Gaza Strip was cut off through kind of coordinated action between the Palestinian Authority and Israel this summer. Hamas has taken a strategic decision. The current leader of Hamas, Yahya is a real pragmatist. He's a strategist, I should say. I think they've taken a strategic decision to reconcile with the Sisi government in Egypt, to distance themselves a little bit from Qatar, to try to bide their time until Mahmoud Abbas's death, which will be within the coming decade, probably.
Or new elections.
Or new elections. But I think that for them, this is an incredibly important opportunity to achieve some calm and to restore some prosperity, to do some building in the Gaza Strip that's long overdue. I think Abu Mazen needs an achievement because his movement is so deeply delegitimized as a consequence of Israel's refusal to negotiate with him in a sort of fair way over these last years. That's another topic we can discuss further. And I think that the Egyptians see the Gaza Strip as an important place to stabilize in view of the insurrection within the Sinai Peninsula. And so I think among the three of them, there is a view that this is a useful step in the right direction. The thing that's been surprising to me is that, as you noted, Israel has tacitly green-lighted this, even sort of facilitating an electric link between the West Bank and Gaza Strip and facilitating more export of goods from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank than has been the case in a while. Why that's so is something I'd love to get other panelists to weigh in on. I don't know if it's part of a quieting sort of undertaking or what, but I don't have a theory on that.
Maybe Israel hopes that Egypt will take over permanently.
Well, that's a possibility.
Okay, thank you. So we are a little bit over time. We're about 10 minutes behind schedule. So I wanted to give an opportunity for any pressing clarifications and point of information questions from community members. And thank you so much, all of you, for your patience, because we will get to a very vibrant and robust discussion in the next session after the break. But any clarifications or point of info questions that you have now? Yes.
Yeah, Professor Bain, the second slide that you showed was a memorandum on the Balfour Declaration. Am I right?
1919.
The last slide was Balfour's goodbye memorandum to the Foreign Office.
Okay, my question is, what was the purpose of that? I mean, it seemed like a very strange document. It was saying that the Balfour Declaration was a lie, basically, right? That we didn't intend to really do any of the things that we said. Well, why would we say that?
Well, it's okay, I'm out of here, so FYI, here's how we screwed up. Deal with it now. Balfour, however, makes it pretty clear that of all the contradictory promises, the one that he thought was important to keep was some version of the Balfour Declaration. Zionism, be it good or bad, right or wrong, is of far greater importance than the desires of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. Why did he think that? He thought that for a number of reasons. First, he was a big believer in the power of international Jewry. Second, he was an evangelical Protestant and believed in the premillennial dispensationalist theology according to which Jews have to return and the kingdom of David has to be reestablished before the second coming of Christ. Third, by August of 1919, when this memorandum was written, there were the beginnings of a very large nationalist uprising in England. In Egypt, sorry. So, if there was going to be trouble in Egypt, Palestine was an excellent place to guard the Suez Canal from. And more British officials who had earlier had doubts about establishing basically a Jewish colony under British protectorate, but what was really on the table, came around to thinking that there was some strategic value to this as well.
Any other pressing clarifications or points of information?
I've heard it said that Balfour was kind of a closet anti-Semite, and that one of his thoughts was that some British Jews would also emigrate to Palestine if it were established.
Balfour was definitely an anti-Semite. He had been prime minister in 1905, 1906, and as prime minister, one of the pieces of legislation that he promoted was the Aliens Act, which was enacted precisely to stop the flow of Russian and other Eastern European Jews who were fleeing persecution in the Tsarist Empire from entering into Britain. This is when Chaim Weizmann came. So not everybody was a chemistry professor. There were lots of poor Jews who ended up in the East End of London, and he wanted to keep them out.
Given that British policy has developed in the following 30 years after the Balfour Declaration, do you think that the Declaration itself was determinative in the creation of Israel, or to what extent was it determinative?
I like Omar's approach to questions like this, yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, because the Declaration was written into the preamble of the mandate instrument that the League of Nations gave to Great Britain, so that the British, at that point, from 1922 on, had an international obligation to develop a national home, a Jewish national home in Palestine, while also doing something or other for the indigenous Arab population, not all that specified. But the ultimate determinant of whether or not there was going to be a Jewish state was armed force. And the Zionists understood this from the middle of the 1936-39 Arab Revolt on, during which the labor Zionist militias were trained by the British and allied to them in suppressing the Arab Revolt. And at that moment, it became clear that the Arabs were not going to be able to effectively resist, and that Zionist armed force would be further developed and would eventually become superior. It wasn't 100% clear, let's say, in November of 1947, that the Zionist armed forces were going to be superior, but by June of 1948, that was clearly established.
Okay.
Yes. As you heard, as you have seen, as you witnessed with the discussion, we still ask the question, are we trapped by history, or can we learn from it to shape a just future?